What kind of leader thrives in chaos? Erwin Rommel's first-hand account reveals how grit, strategy, and raw nerve turned the blood-soaked forests of World War I into a proving ground for a future legend.
As ordered, the 2nd Battalion arrived at Les Escamports farm at 05:30 on September 24, 1940. We halted and rested in a small, dark farmhouse room. Colonel Haas ordered the Salzmann Battalion to move through the forest and seize and hold the intersection of Four-de-Paris-Varennes Road and Old Roman Road. The stimulation brought on by anticipation of a new mission caused us to overlook our fatigue, and I even forgot my complaining stomach. While the battalion was getting underway, the sun rose out of the morning mists like a red ball of fire. Maintaining direction by compass, we plowed through the dense and trackless underbrush toward the intersection. I marched on foot at the head of the column, which was frequently forced to detour around impenetrable undergrowth. During the last few years of peace, the junior officers of the 100 had been given intensive training in the use of the compass at night, and this training now reaped its just reward. It took us an hour to reach the Old Roman Road at a point about 2/3 of a mile from our objective. We moved off to the south with the usual march security, and the staff marched behind the advance guard. A mounted reconnaissance detachment returned from the Four-de-Paris-Varennes highway and reported that the enemy had entrenched himself along the road. Caution was indicated. Preceded by security elements, the 5th and 6th companies headed toward the highway over different routes. The tall trees were now clearly visible, but the underbrush was just as thick as before. The battalion commander remained with the 7th and 8th companies in the vicinity of the shelter hut, while I went on with the point of the 6th company. A few dead Frenchmen lay beside the road. Suddenly we heard the sound of rapidly approaching horses up ahead. Were they friend or foe? Along this badly overgrown road, the maximum range was 80 yards at the most. The point dove into the bushes on both sides of the road. The next moment, a herd of riderless horses came galloping around the turn, stopped at sight of us, and dashed off to the right. While the 6th company reached the main road without further incident, the 5th company over on the left became engaged in a lively scrap. I galloped back to the battalion to report. At the same time, the 5th company reported that they had run into the enemy behind the abattis, 600 yards south of the shelter hut, that he was being reinforced, and that a further advance was impossible without additional support. Soon after this, 2 badly wounded 5th company officers were brought back. The volume of firing increased on the 5th company front, and shots were also heard from the 6th company. Bullets crashed through the forest, and we could not tell whether or not they were from snipers. Major Salzmann committed the 8th company on the left of the 5th company. Both companies were to attack simultaneously and throw the enemy back across the Four-de-Paris-Varennes highway. The 8th company had barely left when leading units of the 5th and 6th Jäger battalions arrived at the shelter hut. We learned that their mission was identical to ours. After a little deliberation, Major Salzmann committed the 5th Jäger Battalion on the left of the 5th and GTH companies, giving the Jägers the mission of assisting our companies in throwing the French back across the road. Within 45 minutes, this attack had been stopped cold. According to the reports of many wounded, the enemy was located in considerable strength behind an abattis and had many machine guns in position. About this time, Captain Count von Rambal of the 6th Company came back slightly wounded and reported that he was opposed by a company of French on the Four-de-Paris-Varennes highway about 200 yards east of his present position, and that the woods to the west of his unit still had not been cleared. I went up to the 6th Company to look over the situation. Advancing south of the Four-de-Paris-Varennes highway with a strong reconnaissance detachment from the 6th Company, I ran into the enemy 60 yards east of the 6th Company's hedgehog position. As a result of this reconnaissance, I believed that we were opposed merely by a strong enemy outpost. On returning to the battalion, I recommended that we attack along both sides of the road to seize Varennes. The 6th Company going straight down the road, while the 7th Company and the 6th Jäger Battalion attacked on either side of the road. This maneuver would take the enemy now holding up the others in flank. Before any action transpired, we received a regimental order to clear the Varennes highway. The 5th and 6th Jäger battalions were attached to the 2nd Battalion for this operation. At this same time, the 6th Company reported that closed columns of French were approaching from the direction of Four-de-Paris, so it was high time to clear up the situation in the east. We got ready for the attack as fast as possible. The 6th Jäger Battalion was to move south of the highway with its left flank on the road. The 7th Company was committed to the north of the road. The 6th Company was to attack on the left of the 7th Company after leaving strong security detachments on the Four-de-Paris road. When all units had reported themselves ready, they moved forward to the attack. The battalion staff followed the 7th Company. 100 yards from the jump-off, we were forced to the ground by heavy enemy fire. We could hardly see more than 25 yards through the thick undergrowth and could see nothing of the enemy. Our companies opened fire and worked toward the invisible enemy by means of short rushes. Because of the deafening sound of the rifles, it was impossible to approximate the distance to the enemy. His fire increased in intensity. Our attack was halted. In order to get the 7th Company moving forward again, Major Salzmann and I got into the front line. It was impossible to handle a larger unit in those woods. Several times we rushed through the bushes toward the enemy, whom we supposed to be very close. We never succeeded in getting to him, but time and again his rapid fire forced us to the ground. The calls for aid men told us that our casualties were increasing. Pressed flat on the ground or behind thick oak trees, we let the enemy fire go by, and then at the first let-up attempted to gain more ground in his direction. It was becoming harder to get the men to move forward. Consequently, we gained ground slowly. Judging from the sound of the fighting, our neighbors were about abreast of us. Once again we rushed the enemy in the bushes ahead of us. A little group of my former recruits came with me through the underbrush. Again the enemy fired madly. Finally, scarcely 20 paces ahead, I saw 5 Frenchmen firing from the standing position. Instantly my gun was at my shoulder. 2 Frenchmen, standing one behind the other, dropped to the ground as my rifle cracked. I still was faced by 3 of them. Apparently my men sought shelter behind me and couldn't help me. I fired again. The rifle missed fire. I quickly opened the magazine and found it empty. The nearness of the enemy left no time for reloading, nor was any shelter close at hand. There was no use thinking of escape. The bayonet was my only hope. I had been an enthusiastic bayonet fighter in time of peace and had acquired considerable proficiency. Even with odds of 3-1 against me, I had complete confidence in the weapon and in my ability. As I rushed forward, the enemy fired. Struck, I went head over heels and wound up a few paces in front of the enemy. A bullet entering sideways had shattered my upper left leg, and blood spurted from a wound as large as my fist. At any moment, I expected a bullet or bayonet thrust. I tried to close the wound with my right hand and at the same time to roll behind an oak. For many minutes I lay there between the two fronts. Finally my men broke through the bushes and the enemy retreated. Lance Corporal Rauch and Private Rutschmann took care of me. A coat belt served as tourniquet and they bandaged my wound. Then they carried me back to the hut in a shelter half. From up ahead word came that the enemy, leaving 200 prisoners, had been driven from behind his abatis and out of the woods. Our own casualties had been considerable. 30 dead, including 2 officers, and 8 wounded, including 4 officers for the 2nd Battalion alone. As it was later reported in the regimental history, this was the 3rd time in 3 days that the battalion had distinguished itself. It was tough leaving these brave men. As the sun set, 2 men carried me back to Mont Blanville in a shelter half attached to 2 poles. I felt but little pain, yet I fainted from loss of blood when I regained consciousness in a Mont Blanville barn. Schnitzer, the battalion surgeon, was working over me. Handler had brought him. My wound was dressed again and I was loaded into an ambulance beside 3 wounded, groaning comrades. We left for the field hospital, the horses trotting over the shell-torn road, and the jolting which resulted caused me great pain. The field hospital was overcrowded. Blanketed men lay in rows along the highway. 2 doctors worked feverishly. They re-examined me and gave me a place on some straw in a room. At daylight, an ambulance took me to the base hospital at Stenay, where, a few days later, I was decorated with the Iron Cross, 2nd class. In the middle of October, after having had an operation, I was taken home in a private car that had been placed at the Army's disposal. Observations: the enemy along the Four-de-Paris-Varennes highway made it most difficult for 2nd Battalion to accomplish its mission. 3 battalions were finally engaged in the attack in the woods, and it was only after sustaining heavy losses that they were able to drive the enemy from the dense woods. The high casualty rate began with the opening of the engagement. Among others, 3 officers were lost. It is hard to say whether or not French tree snipers were at work, for none was discovered and brought down. With our high casualty rate, we had difficulty in getting the men to drive ahead. In forest fighting, the personal example of the commander is effective only on those troops in his immediate vicinity. In a man-to-man fight, the winner is he who has 1 more round in his magazine.
For more secret stories of cunning, endurance and iron resolve, hit the like and subscribe to ride along as we explore the secrets lurking in the shadows and echoing through the corridors of the past. Welcome to the Shadows and the Past, where history meets mystery and the past is your present.